Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 400. Thank you guys for joining me today. Hope you guys have had a great week. I have a really good podcast for you today. And we're not going to, unfortunately, make it back into the book of Hebrews as I had anticipated. The meat of the book of Hebrews, as I want to get into, will probably be a week from today that we get back into that, because I have a lot to cover today that kind of going to pick up where we left off in the last podcast, talking about the feud, the war of words between the Pope and the President of the United States. I want to explain some things to you. And again, I have so much that I know that I'm probably not going to finish today, so I'm going to have to pick this back up on Monday, and then hopefully next Friday we can get back into in talking about the temple and the book of Hebrews and all of that. Some of of this is going to relate in this podcast. We're still talking about the war of words, the feud that has been going on between not only the papacy. Also, you had the Catholic bishops, the cardinals, 3 cardinals from the United States that were interviewed on 60 Minutes on Sunday, and they went after the president. And it's really interesting. The image that we talked about in the last podcast that people are calling blasphemous, sacrilegious. Because it is Trump depicting himself as Jesus. A lot of people were making the statements that saying, well, maybe now Trump said that he thought that he was a doctor. Quite frankly, I think that's ridiculous. I don't necessarily believe that he's telling the truth. But a lot of people are saying that he tweeted it out right after this war of words and back and forth with the Pope, that he could have believed that it was the Pope and not, Jesus, because the Pope wears robes like this. The Pope wears crimson sashes and garments. The Pope, dresses like Jesus. So people were saying that maybe instead of, Trump thinking that he was Jesus, that he in this image thought it was a depiction of the Pope. Either way, I guess it would be sacrilegious if you considered the Pope sacred. A lot of people don't consider the Pope sacred. Catholics consider the Pope sacred, and that's where a lot of people are saying, well, this is an attack on Catholics. And we've been charting this. We've been charting this whole feud between the Catholics being against Zionism, Catholics, even as far as the Pope criticizing Israel's foreign policy in Gaza. And all of this has been going on. That's why we've been telling the story over the past 6-7 months, about the history of the Jews. I told you that we started telling that history after Charlie Kirk was killed, and people started speculating that the Jews killed him and all this stuff. So anyway, the Pope has been on this. We talked about this in the last podcast, on this trip throughout Africa. He was in Algeria. I don't know the other countries that he's going to. He's not going to Nigeria. I know that. He went to Algeria. This is him in Algeria, with one of the largest mosques in the world, with his shoes off, walking with the imam. So this is him in Algeria. So he's going across Africa to all these places, and he's really. We read this in the last podcast. This is the CNN article that said that Christian and Muslim relations will be high on his agenda. High on his agenda. His agenda is creating a relationship between Christians and Muslims, that Christian and Muslims coming together is high on his agenda. And like I said in the last podcast, it's interesting that you have at the same time many Catholics, saying that we reject Zionism, we reject Israel, that the church is the new Israel. And so at the same time, we're rejecting Israel. They're creating a relationship between Christians and Muslims. And it's very interesting because this is not only coming from the church and the Pope. It's also coming from Tucker Carlson and others. We're going to get into that here in a moment. But this was a tweet, and Pope Leo's been very active on his Twitter account. This is a tweet that drew some criticism. You can see the date there, April 13th. So this is after the war of words with the president, and after the president posted the image of him as the Pope or Jesus, either or. The Pope, and he's been posting out a lot of these. Like I said, he's been very active on his X account. A lot of it is very passive aggressive too. Like these statements where he's talking about Trump and talking to Trump, but he doesn't mention him by name. Very, very passive aggressive. But he put this out on the 13th after his meeting with the imam in Algeria. Communion between Christians and Muslims takes shape under the mantle of Our Lady of Africa. Here in Algeria, the maternal love of Lala Miriam gathers everyone as children. Everyone is children. Our Lady of Africa gathers everyone as children, even non-believers. Within our rich diversity, communion with non-believers, communion with our rich diversity and our shared aspiration for dignity, love, justice, and peace in a world where division and wars sow pain and death. Living in unity and peace is a compelling sign. Apostolic journey. So the Pope put that out. And like I said, he's been putting out tons. So he wants this communion between Christians and Muslims. So he says that Christian-Muslim relations is high on his agenda in Africa. Communion between Christians and Muslims. And I've been seeing this a lot. I've been seeing this going on for a long period of time, even before this Pope was elected. Leo hadn't even been Pope for a full year yet. He was elected in May of last year. So he hadn't even been a Pope for a full year. So this is, like I said, even his predecessor, Pope Francis, and invited all these imams into the Vatican. This was high on Francis's agenda too. What is this about? Jesus was a Muslim. I've been seeing a lot of Muslims promoting this, that Jesus was a Muslim, that Jesus is in the Quran, and Jesus was this great prophet in Islam. We revere Jesus. That Christians have more in common with us because, we revere Jesus, and the rabbinic Jews, they say that Jesus is in excrement in hell in the Talmud. They don't revere Jesus. They despise Jesus. But we as Muslims, we revere Jesus. Jesus is in the Quran as someone who we love and we revere because Jesus was a Muslim. I've been seeing a lot of this. I took this picture myself. These guys are in the park every single Sunday. These are Muslims that are in the park every single Sunday with this tent. I'll tell you this interesting story. A couple of weeks ago, and I really wish I would have taken my phone out and got this on camera. But these Muslims, they're in the park every single Sunday with this tent. Jesus is a Muslim. Jesus said in the Quran, "Indeed, I am the servant of Allah. He has given me scripture and made me a prophet." That's in the Quran. In the Quran, Jesus is a prophet. In the Bible, Jesus is the Son of God. We'll get into that. We'll get into who Jesus is in the Bible. But Jesus is different. The Jesus in the Bible and the Jesus of the Quran are two different people. And my question is, and I asked this question, well, let me tell you the story about what happened a couple of weeks ago. I was in the park and I saw these guys being confronted by this former Muslim, African, he said he was from Pakistan, but he had converted into Christianity, but he was raised in Islam his entire life, but he converted into Christianity. So this guy knew the Quran like the back of his hand, but he also knew his Bible very, very well. And man, he ate these guys up. Like I said, I wish I would have taken out my phone and recorded this guy eating the lunch of these Muslims that were promoting that Jesus was a prophet and that Jesus was a Muslim and all this stuff. The point I'm making and that I want to get to is that the Shahada, the profession of faith that the Muslims have to recite to become a Muslim, the profession of faith that is given to Muhammad in the story of Isra, when Muhammad ascends to heaven and he's there with God, Moses, and Jesus, that God tells Muhammad that you, Muhammad, are my messenger. That the time of Jesus is over. The time of Moses is over. That you, Muhammad, are my messenger. And that's the profession of faith that the Muslims have to profess, is that Jesus, what are you saying? Jesus is a Muslim, but the profession of faith that you say says Jesus is no more. Jesus is the time of Jesus is gone because the prophet, the messenger prophet is Muhammad. So my question is, why are you talking about Jesus at all? Why do we need to talk about Jesus at all? Tell me about Muhammad. Why are you using Jesus to sell me Muhammad? But I've seen a lot of this. So the point I'm making is that this is bigger than the Pope. This is bigger than Pope Leo. That this was a issue that was in the forefront of the agenda of Pope Francis before Pope Leo. This is an agenda that I'm seeing many Muslims promoting, that Jesus was a Muslim, that we revere Jesus, that we love Jesus, that be friends with us. This is what Paul says in the second letter to the Church of Corinthians, in the 6th chapter, 14th verse. Do not yoke together yourselves with unbelievers. For what does righteousness and wickedness have in common? For what fellowship can light have with darkness? What harmony is there between Christ and Belial? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? Well, people will say, well, the Muslims are believers. They believe in the same God we believe. No, they don't believe in Jesus as Messiah. They don't believe in Jesus as Lord. They don't even believe that Jesus was crucified. I mean, what harmony can you have with that? What fellowship can you have with that? But meanwhile, you have people pushing that harmony, trying to push that fellowship, push that communion, is what the Pope says. What agreement is there between the temple of God and idols? For we are back to this concept that the church didn't replace Israel, church that replaced the temple, that we, the church, are the temple of the living God, is what Paul says. So Tucker, he's another one who's pushing this. Very interesting. It's very interesting that all of these people at the same time period are all pushing this same agenda, and it's coming from many different angles. And like I said, I've been noticing it for a while. It's just not coming from anyway. It makes me very. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But this is what the post that Tucker put out. And he put this out just, what date is this? So this is April 14th. So this is the day after Pope Leo's Pope saying that we need to have communion with the Muslims. Tucker Network put this out. The people in charge do not want you to know this, but Muslims love Jesus. The people in charge just happens to put this out. Tucker just happens to put this out. And it's all related to this war of words, this feud going on between the Vatican, the Pope, and the President of the United States, and the President of the United States and Israel are on one side. The President of the United States is tainted by Israel. That's the narrative. So the people in charge don't want you to know this, but Muslims love Jesus. Islam reveres him as a major prophet and messenger of the Lord. Yeah, just like the guy in the park says. Yeah, Jesus is a Muslim. Jesus said all these great things in the Quran. Jesus, Moses, David, Abraham, they're all Muslims. This is what Tucker's pushing. Jesus was a Muslim. That Muslims love Jesus because Jesus was a Muslim. Well, they don't treat Jesus' followers very well in countries that are governed by Muslims. I know that. The people in charge. Who are the people in charge? I skipped over that. The people in charge. Who are these people? Who are these people? The Jews. The Jews. 15 million Jews running the whole world. The people in charge. The Jew. Let's just say the Jews. I'm just going to say the Jews when I read this. The Jews don't want you to know this, but Muslims love Jesus. Islam reveres him as a major prophet and messenger of the Lord, believes he performed miracles, states that he will return to earth to defeat the Antichrist. Yeah. This Jesus that they're talking about that's going to return to earth to defeat the Antichrist is the Antichrist. He will return to earth to defeat the Antichrist. That's why Donald Trump's painting depicting himself as the son of God offended the president of Iran. This is crazy. Tucker Carlson is really off the deep end. And you guys know, if you've watched my podcast, man, when everybody was criticizing Tucker in the beginning, I mean, I was, defending him. I was standing by him, but this guy is off the deep end. I have more of Tucker Carlson that I'm going to share here in a moment, but that's why Donald Trump's depicting himself as the son of God, making reference to the infamous picture. Yes. That's why Donald Trump depicting himself as the son of God offended the president of Iran. It was an attack on his religion as well as Christianity. So what is Tucker Carlson talking about here? So he's talking about the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian. I guess that's how you pronounce it. Masoud Pezeshkian. So this was in response to the infamous picture that Trump posted of himself as either the Pope or Jesus, whatever you believe. Who cares? I don't really care. Hey, this is a meme. I don't care about that. So, but, and the thing is about this too, Tucker Carlson, what a sap. This entire war, Iran has been making these AI Lego videos, but also the White House has been making like meme videos, AI videos that they've been putting out ever since this war started. This war from the beginning has been the most, the propaganda that was used in this war was a tool of war, a weapon of war from the beginning. The Iranians were actively using propaganda, AI videos, and other propaganda messaging that was going out. It was all one of their most effective weapons was the propaganda. We were using it too. Like I said, I believe that moving forward in human history, that propaganda is going to be one of the most effective tools. Propaganda is a very important tool of modern warfare. So they're using propaganda, and we're using propaganda. But to see this post from the president of Iran in the middle of this war, which is largely a propaganda war, and not see Tucker Carlson to not be able to see the propaganda in this post is just fascinating to me. It's either Tucker Carlson is dumb, which I don't think that he's dumb. There may be something more nefarious going on with Tucker Carlson. I don't know what it is, but I'm starting to think that there's something more nefarious going on with that guy. But this is the post from the president of Iran that Tucker Carlson is making reference to. And he referenced Pope Leo in the War of Words. So he's taking the side because the Trump, he's in a war with, his country's in a war, in a military conflict with the United States. Trump's the commander in chief of the military, and the commander in chief of the American military is having a war of words with the American Pope. So he comes out with this propaganda post that just flew right over Tucker Carlson's head. His Holiness, Pope Leo, Pontiff, I condemn the insult on your excellency. Hilarious. His Holiness, Pope Leo the 14th, I condemn the insult to your excellency on behalf of the great nation of Iran. I declare that the desecration of Jesus, the prophet of peace and brotherhood, is not acceptable to any free person. I wish you glory by Allah. Do you know that the Pope has never, with all the protesters that were massacred in the streets of Iran back in January, when they were just protesting in the streets for better living conditions, and the IRGC and the Iranian regime murdered thousands in cold blood, protesters demonstrating for better living conditions in Iran. You know that the Pope Leo, never said a word condemning Iran. You can't find a single word that Pope Leo said condemning directly the Iranian regime and the mullahs for killing their own people. What is going on here? And then you have the Pope taking the side of the mullahs, and then the president, the mullahs, basically saying, "Oh yeah, we're with the Pope," and then the Pope trying to foster communion between Christians and Muslims, and then Tucker coming out with this post saying that Muslims love Jesus. What is going on here, people? What is going on here? What's going on here? And I think that I am a little bit, burdened by my knowledge of history, because I study history a lot. I know history a lot. I've taken an active effort in understanding history. I don't understand all of history. I don't know all of history, but I mean, if it's something important to me from a historical aspect, I'll take the time to dig and to understand and to research from a historical perspective. That's why I share with you guys everything that I come at you with is from a historical perspective, because that's I try to, when I see this, I immediately start thinking of history. I just immediately start thinking of history. And one of the interesting things about this post is that Muslims have always had a problem with the depiction of Jesus. It didn't have anything to do with if you believe this is Jesus or the Pope or whatever. It's funny that a Muslim, Shia Muslim, the president of Iran, would say, "Oh, this is so offensive to our religion." All images of Jesus are offensive to their religion, and has been for centuries. For centuries. I started thinking about when I saw that in that post. I guess Tucker doesn't know this history, but the Great Schism, the schism between the Western Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, where the two churches split in the 11th century in 1054. There were many issues that were causing this schism. This is going to get us into, because when we get into the next podcast, we're going to start talking more deeply about the papacy and the office of the papacy in the next podcast. But at this time, the Eastern Church and the Western Church, when they had this split, they didn't view the papacy the way the papacy is viewed today, as all infallible ruler of the entire church. They did not at all. And we're going to get into more of this in the next podcast. But one of the leading issues that was forcing the split of the Eastern and Western Church in the 11th century was this issue of iconoclasm. iconoclasm, because the Eastern Church, because they were on the East and they were faced with the Muslim hordes that were trying to take them over, that were trying to take over Constantinople, that Constantinople, the Ottoman Turks, they don't conquer Byzantium until 1453. The split happens, the schism happens in 1054. So you're talking about 399 years that the Byzantine Empire lasted after the Great Schism. So the Byzantine Empire was still intact at this time of the schism, very, very much intact. And the issue around iconoclasm, which was one of the major issues forcing the schism, was that the Muslim hordes kept attacking the Byzantine Empire and trying to conquer them. And the reason that the Muslims gave the Byzantine Orthodox Church that the reason that we're attacking you is because you use icons. Because you use icons of Jesus, so it doesn't matter. So that's the funny thing about this. And when I read this and started thinking from a historical perspective, all images of Jesus, Muslims believe are sacrilegious and that are desecrations of Jesus. All images of that's why Muslims destroy. It's why if you go to the Middle East and you or go to a museum in England, go to a museum in London and look at artifacts statues and things that they've brought back from the Middle East. The nose is missing because they smashed the nose. They smashed any of the images when ISIS took over Mosul in Iraq. They went to this museum that had ancient 1,000-year-old ancient Babylonian artifacts, and they destroyed them. They destroyed everything. They destroyed 1,000-year-old Tibetan monuments in Afghanistan. That's what they do. They destroy images. All images. All images are offense to Islam. So when the Muslim president of Iran says that this picture of Jesus or the Pope, whatever, offends us, all images offend you. All images of Jesus offend you. All images of Mary offend you. All images of any religious, it didn't even have to be religious. I mean, the Tibetan monuments and things that you destroyed in Afghanistan, they weren't even, I guess they're religious to the Tibetans, but this is just a complete clown show. And then Tucker puts this out. Oh, the Muslims love Jesus because the Iranian president puts out a post saying that he's offended because of the image of Jesus. They've been offended by images for 1,400 years, Tucker, or for 1,300 years. What's wrong with you? Where have you been? I guess you don't understand history. So we're going to talk about the papacy in this podcast. We're going to talk about the office of the papacy, but we're going to get more into it in the next podcast because of this conflict between the papacy and the president of the United States. And I just want to explain some things as we get into this because I think it's important for you to understand. All these people are saying, well, the Pope is wrong because he's wading into politics and he shouldn't be wading into politics. Again, you don't understand history, folks. Where have you been? People saying, anyone who's saying that the Pope should not be wading into politics, where have you been? Popes have always, for 1,700 years, waded into politics. Always. And you name them. That's the whole thing. That's what people don't understand, which we're going to get into more into in the next podcast. But this is the papal crest. What does this crest mean? Well, you have the papal tiara. This is called this crown is called the papal tiara. And you can see that it's got 3 different sections. What are these sections? Each one of these sections has a meaning in the papal tiara. This top section is the Pope's spiritual authority. That's what that top section stands for. And then this middle section represents the papacy's, the Pope's doctrinal authority over doctrine. That's that middle one. So spiritual, doctrinal. This last one here is the Pope's temporal governing authority. That's what this crown represents. The Pope has spiritual authority. What does that mean? Spiritual authority. Authority in heaven. Authority among that around spiritual things, that the Pope has the authority of the spiritual things that are spiritual. But the Pope also has authority over things that are doctrinal, and people need to understand that the Pope also has authority over the temporal and everything that is temporal and governing authority. This is part of the papal theology. And this is reiterated with these 2 keys. What do these keys represent? Well, these keys represent, the gold key represents the spiritual authority, but the silver key represents the temporal authority. Authority on heaven, authority in heaven, and authority on earth. This all goes back to Matthew 16. We may have time to get into a little bit of Matthew 16 in this podcast, but we're going to get deep into Matthew 16 in the next podcast, because this all comes from Matthew 16. These keys are the authority to bind and loosen, is what the text says, the heavenly things, but also the temporal things. And this has always been a battle. It's since the beginning of what I call the imperial church. People talk about the apostolic church, and that the Catholic Church goes back to the apostolic church. Well, the apostolic church becomes the imperial church in around the beginning of the 4th century, and in the beginning of the imperial church, where the emperor embraces the Christian church. Before Constantine, the emperors were persecuting the Christian church. Before Constantine, even going back to Emperor Nero was the first to start persecuting, and this is in the 1st century, in 64 A.D. that Nero starts persecuting Christians. But all the way to Constantine, emperors were persecuting Christians, and then Constantine is the first to embrace the Christian church. He becomes Christian, and that's when the church becomes a imperial church. So from the beginning of the imperial church, popes and emperors have always battled for that temporal authority, because popes saw the temporal governing authority as part of their authority as given to them by Jesus. So that's very important to understand. And popes have always went back and forth with emperors, with kings, and kings attempting to control the papacy. That's what the Avignon papacy was, when the French king brings the papacy to Avignon, France, and they call it the Babylonian captivity, because the papacy was there for 70 years. All of these things in the history, if you understand the history of the papacy, the popes have always waded into politics, always had confrontations with kings and leaders. What's happening between the Pope and Trump right now is not new at all. And this is a clip, this woman on CNN who professes to be a Catholic. I guess she doesn't seem to understand that history, but listen to what she says.
Practicing Catholic, I know that the Vatican doesn't operate in our political paradigm. It's in the divine spiritual realm. So when the Pope sounds like the UN spokesperson saying no confrontation, no conflict, only peacekeeping, only diplomacy, that is totally normal. However, we learned this lesson with Pope Francis, who waded into politics probably more than any other pope before him.
That's not true.
In terms of our modern politics, you do have
at least in terms of our modern politics. Learn some history. Have a historic perspective. That's not true that Pope Francis is waded into politics more than any other pope. No, there's been popes that have waded much more into politics than Pope Francis or Leo.
Pope Francis, who waded into politics probably more than any other pope before him, at least in terms of our modern politics. You do have to care about precision and exactitude as the successor to Peter, as someone who is informing the opinions of so many lay Catholics. So when you say, as the Pope, and I say this as a practicing Catholic, that God does not hear the prayers of those who wage war, that is a bit precarious and does risk confusing practicing Catholics, because does that mean the war to fight Hitler in World War II, was that unjust?
Yeah, all the biblical wars. I mean, that was just ridiculous that God doesn't listen to look up, God doesn't listen to the prayer. We talked about Pope Urban II, who called the Crusades, and Abby Phillip is going to interrupt her and say, well, he was talking about just war. And were the Crusades a just war that were ironically fought against Muslims that were trying to take over the Holy Land? Was that just? But look up Pope Julius II. Julius II, very interesting pope. And again, man, you just have to have a historical perspective, because popes have always waded into politics. Politics and temporal authority is part of their authority, as they see their authority as given to Peter from Matthew 16. Peter didn't only give Peter Jesus didn't only give Peter spiritual authority, he also gave him temporal authority. We played this gentleman, this British Catholic priest in the last podcast, him saying that the church is the new Israel. And I was explaining in the last podcast, well, if the church is the new Israel, then the priesthood of the church would replace the priesthood of Israel, and you have a new priesthood. And I said that, and if that's true, that you have a collection of priests like the Sanhedrin, but then you also have a high priest, like the many high priests that go back to Aaron, who was the very first high priest. And I said, well, in correspondence with that, if the church replaced, now I don't believe the church replaced Israel. Let me just state that. I don't believe, but many Catholics do. And this gentleman's, we're going to play the clip again. He says it, that the church replaced Israel. And I believe that the church replaced the temple. I don't believe that the church replaced Israel, but many Catholics do. And I said, well, if the church replaced Israel in this replacement theology, then the priesthood, the Catholic priesthood, would replace the Jewish priesthood. And then the Pope would be in the position of high priest. He would correspond to the high priest. And Jesus had a lot to say about the Jewish priesthood. As a matter of fact, most of, if you go through and read the Gospels, most of his confrontations were with the Sadducees and the Pharisees, that he had a lot to say about the Jewish priesthood. And my question is, with those things that Jesus said about the Jewish priesthood, would they correspond to the Catholic priesthood if in this replacement theology? If the church replaces Israel, and then the priesthood would replace the Jewish priesthood, with what Jesus said about the Jewish priesthood, would that correspond to the Catholic priesthood? It's just a question that I'm asking. But many Catholics believe that the church replaced Israel.
Modern day Jews are not the Jews of the Bible. The Talmud.
And modern day Jews are not the Jews. Listen to what he says. Modern day Jews are not the Jews from the Bible. And if you've watched my podcast, you know this is one of my peeves. I don't like this because it's not true.
All of them. The Gentiles and the Jews together are called Christians. Modern day Jews are not the Jews of the Bible. The Talmudic Judaism didn't exist in that time.
So that's not true. That's not true. Talmudic Judaism did exist in the time of Jesus. Like I just said, if you go back and you read the Gospels are the Bible, right? The Gospels are the Bible. So the Jews that Jesus that he had most of his confrontations with were Pharisees and Sadducees, but the Pharisees are the people that laid the foundation, the oral traditions for rabbinic Judaism. Modern day rabbinic Judaism comes from the Pharisees. So it's not true to say that the Jews from the Bible that are in the gospel that Jesus is having these confrontations with and these, dialectic debates with in the Bible, that they're not the Jews of today, when those Jews that Jesus was having confrontations with are the people that laid the foundations for rabbinical. The Pharisees laid the foundations for modern rabbinical Judaism. So first of all, that's wrong.
Modern day Jews are not the Jews of the Bible. The Talmudic Judaism didn't exist in that time. The Jews of the time are now Christians. The Gentiles of the time are now Christians. I'm not a Jew or a Gentile. I'm a Christian. Like, that shouldn't be confusing. And people seem to think that the Israel on the geographical map that we see today is the Israel of the Bible. No, the Israel of the Bible wasn't geographical. It was the nation of Israel. It was the people. It was the community, which is now known as the church. So the church is Israel. And so people are getting confused.
The church is Israel. The church replaced Israel. That's the replacement theology. This is the Orthodox priest that Tucker interviewed in, I think this was just 2 days ago. His opening monologue in this interview is crazy. He goes into calling Trump the Antichrist and all this stuff. And it's just like, something is real. I think there's something more nefarious going on with Tucker. I really do. Something is up with Tucker. But this is an Orthodox priest. And what's his name? His name is Josiah what's his name? Josiah something. But he's an Orthodox, and he rejects Zionism, just like the British Catholic priest. But he says the same thing, that the church replaced Israel. Take a listen.
False teaching. So is false teaching. There is a lot of made up theology. Began in the middle of the 19th century. It got really going.
He's talking about Christian Zionism. He's talking about Christian Zionism. He's talking about the Scofield Bible and all of this that got made up in the 18th century. And it's bad teaching is what he's saying, bad theology.
False teaching. So is false teaching. There is a lot of made up theology. Began in the middle of the 19th century. It got really going in the beginning of the 20th century, particularly in America. That has created this very strange theology of what unbelieving Jewish people are, non-Christian Jewish people, and their special relationship with God. It's very strange. Zionism has no history in the Christian faith. It's not as though that it's just a matter of denominational preference. No, you will seek in vain for 18 and a half centuries to ever hear of such things. That doesn't exist. The church is very conscious of being the fulfillment of everything that took place in the Old Testament. The church is the people of God. Paul calls the church directly the new Israel. That's who we are. We are God's people, and we're made up both of Jewish people and Gentile people from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation.
He's right about that. So again, is what he's saying about what Paul says, and that the nation of Israel is made up of not only Jews. If you're going to take the analogy that the church is the new Israel, it's made up of Jews, it's made up of Gentiles, it's made up of whoever wants to be a part, who accepts Jesus and wants to be a part of the church. But the church replaced Israel. So what I'm saying is that would make sense, that the church, the Catholic Church, and the priesthood of the Catholic Church would also have replaced the Jewish priesthood. So many of the things that Jesus said to the Jewish priesthood, I think, would correspond and pertain to the Catholic Church. But not only the Catholic Church, even the Protestant Church. There's a lot of, that's what I was getting to in the last podcast about in the book of Hebrews, is where the author of Hebrews talks about the high priest and says, we have a high priest that was tempted but did not sin. Men are sinners. Men are have human weaknesses. They have human frailties and are humans succumb to temptation. But the author of Hebrews says that the high priest we have, Jesus, he was tempted, but he did not sin. He is without sin. And that's why you have so much in the church, foul behavior, not only in the Catholic Church, but it is in the Catholic Church, foul behavior by ministers of the Gospels. In the Protestant Church, you see this a lot as well. Ministers of the Gospel doing things, molesting children, and having immoral sex with parishioners. Heterosexual sex, gay sex, the materialism, all that stuff is part of the human frailty of it, and all that stuff is in the priesthood. And that the author of Hebrew is saying, why would you want a high priest that has those human frailties, those human weaknesses, when you can have a high priest that does not sin in Jesus? That's what he's getting to. But the priesthood in Jesus's time, when Jesus is talking to the Jewish priesthood, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, in many of the conflicts that he's having with them, he's calling them detestable. He's calling them vipers. He's calling them hypocrites. The whole scene with Jesus at the temple, whipping the money changers and all of that, that's a very significant event. What's going on there at the temple, because Jesus is challenging a very corrupt priesthood at his time. It may have been the Jewish priesthood, but they were all corrupt. They had been corrupt going back to Malachi. Read Malachi. Malachi was the last prophet, 300 years before Jesus walked the earth. And Malachi, the last prophet in the Tanakh, was calling the priesthood corrupt. You guys are corrupt. The sacrifices you're accepting are an offense to me. So 300 years later, Jesus comes and you're dealing with the Sanhedrin and the high priest. Jesus is calling them corrupt, vipers, hypocrites, all this stuff that he's saying to them. And that's going on in the church as well. The priesthood in the Christian church, not only in the Catholic Church, also in the Protestant church, the priesthood in the church is all those things that Jesus said about the Jewish priesthood is true. They're corrupt. They're vipers. They're sinners. They are hypocrites. All that stuff. And within the Catholic Church, mainly, this is an issue. This is an issue, and it's been an issue for a while that needs to be addressed. Needs to be addressed. I don't know if you remember, we played the clip of Father Rippinger. He was interviewed by, I forget the name of this podcast. What's the guy's podcast? Father Rippinger on Sean Ryan. Interviewed by Sean Ryan. But Father Rippinger is an exorcist. And that's what he does. He performs exorcisms. He casts demons out of people. He's interviewed by Sean Ryan, and he says this about the church. Very interesting that he says this about the church, because this is the very same thing that Jesus was saying about the Jewish priesthood. Take a listen.
In the ritual, there's what they call chapter 1, which is it's a set of rubrics, how to proceed and what's going to happen in the context of a session. And one of them is that the demons will reveal crimes that have occurred. And so in the cases that I have been in, they have not revealed much about the people in the civil authorities, their crimes, so much as they have about the very specific rituals and crimes that people in the hierarchy have committed. And so
he's talking about the hierarchy of the church. And let me just, break this down, what he's saying. He's saying when he's in session and a demon has possessed someone and he's in session to cast this demon out, that if you watch the movie The Exorcist or any of these movies, you see that the priest is speaking to the demon through the host, that the individual who is possessed by the demon is basically just the host, and the demon will take over the body of the host. And then so the demon is communicating with the priest. And he's saying that the demon in many of these cases is telling them, he's not revealing corruption and within the civil authorities, what's going on in government, but they'll start revealing what the corruption that is going on in the church. And he actually says in the church, he's talking about within the church, in the Catholic Church, the demons will start telling that this is the corruption that is going on with the priesthood.
Their crimes so much as they have about the very specific rituals and crimes that people in the hierarchy have committed. And so they've talked about very specific details, given specific details. And it's not just me. Other exorcists are also, they get bits and pieces of this stuff. They don't necessarily have the same full understanding that I have, because the demons have revealed, pretty much the full complexion of what's going on in the church. And it's the fact that the authority structure has been spiritually compromised by some of these people that are in it, that are not, they're obviously involved in things that they shouldn't be involved in. And so, but the other exorcists, even the names of the people involved, the demons have said to us, they've actually meant, not just to me, but to other exorcists, they'll actually say, yes, he mentioned this particular person and this particular person, etc. And so we do have a fairly good complexion. By the way, I'm not the first guy that this has happened to. The Father Amorth, who was the head exorcist in Rome for like 40 years, he complained about this very problem that had been going on since he was just starting being an exorcist. We also get a sense too of like how these guys get inducted to that type of stuff. It starts to come out, in the sessions. The demons have talked about how and it's not stuff that I've ever asked. It's the demons are compelled sometimes by our Lord to talk about this stuff. So there's times like this one case that I'm working on right now. When I'm saying Mass, which we start the sessions with, very often what will happen is during the Mass, the demon will manifest. And that tells me that God has told him he's had to tell me something. And so during the session, something will come out. And very often it revolves around this stuff that's happened. But I've had more than one case talk about the stuff that's going on in the church, that it's spiritual, that it's leadership, not all of it, but
that it's leadership, the leadership in the church. The priesthood in the church. The demons are saying these guys are into some dark stuff, is what he says.
Going on in the church, that it's spiritual, that it's leadership, not all of it, but some of its leadership is very morally compromised, and some of it is involved in stuff that's very dark.
The leadership in the church, demons are saying, very morally compromised and involved in some stuff that is very dark. And then he goes on to say,
there is a book that was just recently put out by a woman who ended up getting inducted into being a victim of satanic ritual abuse through deception. I think that some of these guys can also but there's, like I said, there comes a certain point where it gets revealed what's going on. And so these guys have to either cut bait or they're going to sign off on it, one of the two. But a lot of these guys went into the priesthood already on the other team. And so they, went in specifically to gain the empowerment which comes through being a priest, and then be able to use that power against those of us in the church.
Some of these people were on the other team when they went into the priesthood. They went to the priesthood, occultists, Satan worshipers, whatever, into this dark stuff that he says they're into when they went into the priesthood, and they went into the priesthood to gain this power. Did any of them work their way up through the priesthood, go from priest to bishop, from bishop to cardinal, from cardinal to pope? Did any of them? Well, Sean Ryan asked him, I don't know if I believe this part.
How high up in the church does this go?
Not at the very, very top, but close to the very, very top.
Not at the very, very top, but close to the very, very top. But the thing is that when one of them at the very, very top dies, then the ones that are close to the very top are raised to the very, very top. That's the way that it works. The new popes are selected from the cardinals. So if it's not at the very, very top, but it's close to the top, then what's to prevent some that are close to the top from ascending to the very, very top? And if you know history, this has happened many times. Many, many times. How much time do I have? Yeah, about 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes. This is a very serious issue. This documentary came out in 2014. This is just after Benedict resigns from Pope, which is very weird for a Pope to not die in the office and to resign in the middle of his papacy. But that's what happened to Benedict. He resigned, and then Pope Francis becomes the Pope, and Pope Francis becomes Pope, who's the Pope that Pope Francis is the Pope that was the predecessor of the current Pope. Pope Francis comes in to the papacy at a time of tremendous turmoil in the church. The turmoil is why Benedict had to resign, quite frankly. And this is what was going on, to the theme and what we're talking about the priesthood and the dark stuff going on within the priesthood is what Father Rappinger says. And take a listen to this.
Pope Francis comes on the scene at a time when the church is in a deep crisis. He said, the church is like a field hospital after a battle. He's talking about people who are wounded within the church.
A new beginning for a wounded church. 8 years earlier, when Cardinal Ratzinger was elected Pope Benedict, he also promised a new beginning. He was taking over at a time when the church was reeling from the scandal of sexual abuse by the clergy, and he promised firm action.
I still remember very clearly when Cardinal Ratzinger, in 2005, went through the Stations of the Cross. At the 9th station, I think, he stopped and denounced all the filth that is inside the church. But he said, it's not the people from outside who bring the filth into the church. It is us who make it dirty.
That the filth was inside the church, and it is us that makes it dirty, is what Benedict says. And this is this documentary. You want to watch a fascinating documentary. A lot of parts in this documentary are very hard to watch. It's called Secrets of the Vatican Frontline. Highly recommend it. So it's really interesting, as you see going on right now, that there, and we've been charting this with Carrie Prejean being kicked off of the Religious Liberty Committee, and all of the issues that have been going on between, other Catholics that have been accusing the president of being roped into the war with Iran by Israel, and that Israel controls our foreign policy, and the rejection of Zionism. We've been talking about all of this for the past 6 months and charting this. So this whole reject the Jews and create the Christian-Muslim alliance is not just coming out of nowhere. That this has been building up. And Tucker Carlson, who I think he claims to be Episcopalian or some type of Presbyterian, he, in the same interview that he did with Father Josiah Trenham is his name, Josiah Trenham, Orthodox priest. This is the episode that Tucker did just the other day, and his complete monologue was deranged. Just to be frank, it was completely deranged. But he says this, and he plays this clip from Patrick Bet-David. Take a listen to what Tucker Carlson says.
This is a profound break, and it's a very clear window into what the actual faith is. Israel is the deal killer. Anyone who doesn't support the military aims of the modern Israeli government cannot be part of the MAGA coalition, and, Lindsey Graham has just told us, can't be a Christian. It's amazing. But it's not just Lindsey Graham. This is everywhere today, in case you haven't seen it. Here's Patrick Bet-David on his podcast a day or two ago. Watch this.
I don't know why Catholics, have this issue with Jews. I don't know what it is. They have this. I don't listen. I get the Jews have issues with Christians, and they'll make fun, and they'll say stuff like, "Oh, your Jesus is gonna do." They'll say, "Well, he was a Jew anyways, right?" Yeah. But then Catholics have that issue with Jews. And they act like, they're all innocent and everything. And when you look at Catholics, the amount of centralized power they have. Centralized.
He's absolutely right. And what Patrick that David is saying here, I think that it's so crazy that everyone is focusing on the Jews and this Jewish conspiracy when Jews are 15 million people. He's getting ready to say here, Catholics are 1.4 billion. The Catholic Church is immensely more powerful than any Jewish group, and there really isn't any monolithic Jewish group like the Catholic Church. Like I told you, Jews are not monolithic at all. Some Jews are religious, some Jews are not religious. That's why the focus on the Jews tends to be the focus on Israel, even though the majority of the Jews on this planet don't even live in Israel. So what he says here is absolutely right. And people do not understand history again. They don't understand history. They don't understand. We're going to get more into this in the next podcast.
Make fun. And they'll say stuff like, oh, your Jesus is going to do, they'll say, well, he was a Jew anyways, right?
Yeah.
But then Catholics have that issue with Jews. And they act like, they're all innocent and everything. And when you look at Catholics, the amount of centralized power they have. Centralized. If you know what the total Catholic population is worldwide? It's like 1.213 billion. Jews are 15 million.
15 million.
But Jews are decentralized, meaning Jews don't have somebody they listen to that says, hey, you better do this. Catholics, God forbid you say something about
Netanyahu.
They're like, hey, man, listen.
I guess Netanyahu is like the Pope of the Jews. That's what he's saying. He said that the Jews don't have a Pope. They don't have a Ayatollah. They don't have a high priest. Now, this is very interesting because the case that David is saying here, the Jews did have that in the time of Jesus. That's what I was telling you. That's what, the high priest was the Ayatollah of the Jews in the time of Jesus during the second temple period. He was the high priest was the chief spiritual and chief temporal leader, that both in his hands, just like the Ayatollah in Iran. The Ayatollah in Iran is the chief spiritual leader. He's the chief temporal leader of governing. That's what the Pope is at the Vatican. And not only in the Vatican, if you really understand, like I was explaining to you, the papal crest, that the Pope has all spiritual power and all temporal power. The Ayatollah in Iran has all spiritual power, all temporal power. The high priest in the Jewish Sanhedrin back in the time of Jesus had all of the spiritual power and all of the temporal power. That's what Patrick David is saying here.
Jews are 15 million.
15 million.
But Jews are decentralized, meaning Jews don't have somebody they listen to that says, hey, you better do this. Catholics, God forbid you say something about the Pope. They're like, hey, man, listen, who is that Pope figure in the Christian community? We don't have one.
He means in the Protestant.
Right now, who's the Pope in the Christian community?
He means in the Protestant evangelical Christian movement. Who's the Pope? We don't have a Pope in the Protestant Christian evangelical movement.
You don't have somebody to look at. Who is a witch pastor?
Yeah, exactly. No, they don't.
We don't have one.
It's an independent network.
It's just the Bible.
So if you look at only Catholics and Muslims have somebody that they look at as their supreme leader, like, you got to go to somebody. But even more, it's Catholic.
Well, there's only two theocracies in the world. Catholicism and
in the Vatican.
I'm sorry, the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Yep.
And the Vatican.
Yeah.
Those are the two major theocracies.
So actually, the Vatican is very much like the Nazi Iranian government.
Well, he's aligning himself. He's aligning himself with it. The Nazi regime in Iran, and they're taking the side of the Pope. I mean, he's saying that we need to have communion with those people. What are you talking about, Tucker? All right. We're going to get back into this in the last podcast. My man, where's that post from JV? JV posted this. Where's it at? My man JV posted this, and I responded to it, and I said I was going to answer this question in this podcast. But in the next podcast, when we pick this up, I'm I'm going to answer this question that JV posts. It says, who originally came up with the idea of the Pope? And we'll get into that in the next podcast. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I'll see you on Monday.